So everyone, thank you for attending this session. Today we will have Jorge Powers, who has been working for 10 years with analytics, SEO, development, and DevOps. His talk today is how to manage a Matomo with millions of page views per month, where he will tell us more about their work at Digitalist Sweden, a company which manages some of the biggest Matomo installations in Sweden. So I'm giving the word to Jorge now.
Thank you. Let me just turn my notifications. Thank you for the presentation. As you heard, I've been working with analytics for many years. I've been programming since I was a kid in the 90s, but I started professionally about 11, 12 years ago, working mostly as a front-ender from the beginning, but yeah, I wouldn't label me as front-end, back-end, or SEO expert or anything. I'm a generalist, and I'm wherever I need it, so I'm a problem solver, you could call me. I have recently been on parental leave, so I'm just back working, so this presentation is put together recently, so bear with me, but I'm sure I can answer any questions if you have any. Yeah, let's move on. So I work for Digitalist now. I've been here for 6 years, and I've been working with the DevOps team. I've been project manager, and I've been working with Matomo for 3 or 4 years now in Digitalist. So what am I going to talk about? When we started with Matomo, it was still called pvik, and everyone knows that the GDPR in 2018 was getting in effect. So the government agencies in Sweden were very sort of how to track their data and take ownership of their data. So the Swedish Tax agency, Skatteverket, they had a procurement and reached out to us and asked us if we knew Matomo, and we have had pvik installations running for probably 10 years or so, but we weren't no experts yet, and but we took on this and yeah, so a little bit story. Sweden, it's a small country in Europe if you look at the population, but still we have 10 million plus population in Sweden, and the fiscal declaration, I mean, Sweden is very progressive when it comes to digitalization, and in 2021, 4.5 million people did their fiscal declaration online, and all of those people went into this web to do their declaration, and they have other online services as well and other websites. So a lot of traffic in to their sites, and if you look at the timeline here and you think how big applications were driven back in the days, this entire app would run on a server, Apache, or some kind of services. And then in 2014, Kubernetes came in and changed how the landscape of applications are deployed today. And we signed with the Skatteverket just before 2018, and so we had a bit time before May 25th, I think it was the date when GDPR was in effect. And at this time, if you downloaded the source code to PVIC, as like it was called back in the day, you could go to the online documentation and you see that it's a LAMP stack basically. So you have Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And for us, this is we've been working with open source for 20 years or so. So this is a very familiar area for us. But the challenge here, because in Kubernetes was open sourced in 2014, and it was a little clear how to host this big installation where we knew that we were gonna have a lot of traffic. So we put together a team of our engineers to try to figure out the best option to go forward. Until 2019, we could find more documentation on the Matomo website, how to run a big installation for 100 million page views per month or less. But this is similar to the conclusion we came up with at the time. But when it comes to running this and monitoring and so on, there's still challenges. We can't just deploy some servers and hope they will run for a long time. So we started to sketch our own infrastructure with guidance from the Matomo documentation, of course. At the time when we installed Matomo, MariaDB was still supported by Matomo. And I'm gonna come back to that later. But we were, how should we build a big application, a monolithic application, you could say, is where everything is compiled into source code, and you will put it on a server, and it will just sit there and run the whole application by itself. Which you have services, you have the things that you see, and the communication layer, and the database, basically, or microservices. So these were the options we were looking at the time, and of course, we can't deny that we had requirements from our clients. And now I'm imagining that there's a big crowd out there, and you're probably seeing Rocky Horror Picture Show or something where the audience shout out "boo" or whatever. So we had, for example, backups. We need to have backups. We need to have redundancy. We need to have security certified hosting. We need to have the status of the application. We need to have scalability, because everyone doesn't go in to do their fiscal declaration once a month. This is something you do once a year, probably. You need to be able to restore the systems if it goes down. We need to have certified standards. We need to be able to roll back. And we need high availability so that people from all over Sweden can go in time to do their declarations, basically. So we went to our hosting partner we've been working with for many years, and they are certified Kubernetes, the only one certified Kubernetes in the Nordics at the time. So they were, of course, proposing that we should run this on Kubernetes because it's the next big. That's the in tech. Of course, we wanted to go with the Kubernetes setup, and for us, it was a black box. You could say. It's not the traditional way you should think of about server applications. So we through so many years works in Digitalist. We took some crash courses in Kubernetes, and looking back at it now, and I remember I was thinking like it was a big question mark in my head at the time. But as more we dig into Kubernetes and the everything around Kubernetes, everything became more clear. So you need to throw everything you know about servers and hosting out the window, and you need to rethink how you think about applications and services. So this is a picture I took from the Kubernetes website, and you can see that the traditional deployment, you have the something similar to the 3-tier architecture, or you can have VPSs, and you could have Docker or some kind of auto-scaling hosting. Can't remember the name you call it, but or you could have like running container like microservices. So if you want to know what Kubernetes is in depth, to the Kubernetes webpage, and there is a lot of documentation you can read. But basically, the things that we get out of the box here to meet the requirements was that we could have rollbacks, auto rollbacks. We can have green or roll up. This means basically that we can do in the application without taking down the service. So if Skatteverket, for example, they have, let's say, 100 data analysts, and they go in and they work office time, 9 to 5, and we don't want to take down the application just if you want to run out, if we want to deploy some configuration. So this needs to be very careful doing upgrades. Yeah. So at the time, because we were new to Kubernetes, we had our partner Elastics. They come up with the architecture. So this is what it looked like from the start. You could say we have changed some bits through the years, but the basic concept still. And so when a user, either if you go into the dashboard as an analyst, you get to one container, you could say, or if you have installed your tracking script website, the tracking data will be sent into another service. So this is how we can scale up and down depending on where the load is in the application. And of course, when you dissect a big application like Matomo, you're going to run into some challenges. And I would say the biggest challenge at the time was configuring the database to handle all the load that was coming in. And we could use many of the community. Everything was open source, by the way. I forgot to mention that. But we are an open source company, first of all. So we like open source. We like to keep our infrastructure as code. And the best way of doing that at the time, with the help from our partner, Elastics, they come up with Helm. So Helm is a way to keep your shards, as they call them, the templates for your infrastructure. So this is how we can easily tweak bits and pieces of the application without having to access to a server and go in manually and change something. So every change needs to be documented. So we can do this in our version controlling system with Git. Yeah, so this is Helm. And of course, we have requirements as like can't ship out code, deploy code that have vulnerabilities in them. So we had to figure out some kind of CI/CD workflow where we can automate stuff because you can't really track all the vulnerabilities that come out all the time. So we automate as much as possible. We have a drone. Drone is a CI service where you can plug in different kind of applications, a third-party system that will check your code, your base code. So if you package all your Matomo into a container in Docker, let's say, and all the underlying system applications that are in this Docker image, drone will start a service, and then we will use something that is called Claire, which is the next slide here. And also it's an open source service that will check for vulnerabilities. So everything is run in containers. So before we deploy something out to our production site, this will run up a similar environment where it will check for vulnerabilities, and when we get a green light, then we can do the deploy to the production. And of course, being an open source company and how much the community means for us, we have also open sourced our Helm base setup. So anyone can take our work and replicate what we have done. If you go to our GitHub, you can find the Matomo Kubernetes base setup that we are using. Of course, there's other dependencies. So we use this as a base, and then we have a different project where we over every client we have. Of course, dissecting an application like Matomo, you want to have control. You want to automate as much as possible. So we are dependent on the CLI tools, which at the time we couldn't use. We can add new users, or so every deploy basically we destroy everything, and we build a whole Matomo. And if you know Matomo and how to install it, basically it's a clean install every time. So to be able to keep our database without wiping it, and we had to come up with different CI tools to automate some of the stuff. So, and we have contributed this back to the community, and we have some plugins in the Matomo marketplace One of them we use is the user console, but also most importantly, I would say the extra tools where we can automate a lot of things like DB backups or installation of Matomo. And I took the screenshot yesterday, and it's been downloaded over 4,900 times. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, and this is a more abstract overview of our application. This is more how so in Kubernetes world you have called a pod, and a pod can run multiple containers, and you can have different pods that do tasks. So, for example, if you want to run the core archive job, as the presentation before me, you mentioned the core archive in the. If you go into the server and you use the CLI tool, you can run the archive command and or in a cron job. In Kubernetes world, this is called a job, just a job. Yeah. So, and because of the high load or the millions of page views every month, running a single core archive jobs wasn't enough for us. So we tried to come up with different ways of running this, which has led into other problems too. And we have learned a lot during the years. And we have had discussions with the Matomo team to how to solve this properly, the correct way. And yeah, I bet they have run into similar issues like we have, and but they have probably solved them differently. Yeah, of course, monitoring is important to know when you need to scale up or scale down your applications. So, of course, we use with Kubernetes. It's standard to use Prometheus that will check the status, and we use Grafana to visualize the metrics, which is another very like Kibana if you're used to Kibana or Elasticstack. So yeah, jumping into Kubernetes was a lot of fun, but it's a lot to dig into because you need to know about a lot of stuff. So fun, yeah. So just to give you a hint of how many page views we're dealing with here, so I've tweaked the numbers a little bit. So I don't want to give away the real numbers, but this is very like the real deal. We have also other clients with even more data than this, so we know what we're doing. We have done this for many years now. And if you look here, the fiscal declaration for the Swedish tax payers, it opens up in March, and you can see there's a peak because everyone wants to go in and to see their tax returns if they're getting anything or if they need to pay more taxes. So this is something we can prepare for, and we can scale up our services. We can also under the hood, we can also add more servers or hardware if you want. So that's possible too. But doing a migration, that's something I would not recommend for anyone. So if you want to run a big Matomo installation, you need plans so you have enough hardware in place, because doing a migration is a tough project. And so here's a little peek from one of our where we override the values in our Helm charts. So this is something where we can prepare, like it's the fiscal declaration is coming up and it's opening. We know that we can add more replicas to the dashboard or to the tracker pods. And if you look behind the red line, you see also one of the console commands. This is also one of the challenges we had, because we couldn't, at the time, we couldn't use a read write many NFS folder. So we had to come up with an idea how to regenerate tag manager containers. So this is a way you can do that in the Kubernetes setup, is to run the command. So this is where the console commands are so important for us. Yeah, we can also add more CPU, more memory to each pod or group of pods. I wouldn't recommend to do it individually per pod, but you can. You have a basic template, and then you can tweak that for different services. We have one that is tracking. The tracking data is sent into a Redis middle layer where it stores, because if the database is too busy, we need to keep the data so it doesn't disappear or take down the database. So this is how we can add a queued tracking service. And this is a peek. From the beginning, we would only use CLI tools, but now the bigger we get and the bigger the team gets, we need to automate a lot of stuff. This is a screen for CI/CD workflows that we're seeing tools that is called OCD, which I think it's really awesome. Also open source, of course, where we can go in and see all the pods in a nice graphic view. And we can check logs, or we can see the health, the status. And green heart means that everything is operational and running. But you see the magnitude of the pods or the microservices that is running in the background. And yeah, and this is a tool that I like, that I've been using a lot through the years. It's K9s, and it's a nice CLI visualization tool to see the health and status of your cluster. So I can highly recommend to use K9s if you're more into sitting in a terminal than having a graphical overview. Yeah, so the challenges we had through the years was the DB configuration, and jumping into trying to debug a black box from the beginning to find throttles or bottlenecks in our application. Yeah, it was yeah, some of the ways we do it now, we have added more plugins. I haven't shared all of those to the community yet, because they're not ready for release, I would say. But we get enough of data to find if we want to run a MySQL tuner to check the health of the database. We have automated a lot of stuff to do that nowadays. And from the beginning, MariaDB, being an open source company, and the fact that MySQL wasn't no longer open source, or it was open source, but kind of, because they were acquired by Oracle. We chose MariaDB, and when Matomo added more features, 2019, I think, to run big Matomo installations, they wouldn't support MariaDB, and that was very frustrating sometimes. I did a patch, so I can do stuff now today that we couldn't do in MariaDB back then. And then, of course, the core archives, having a lot of data. And one of my colleagues, Thomas, is going to talk more about some of the challenges we had or how you can break Matomo. I think his session name is the title of his session. And I would recommend to join his sessions because, he will talk more in detail how to break core archives. And we had problems from the beginning with forms. They would automatically include in every site that you put up in Matomo, and that gave us a little bit of headache. But we have dealt with that. Of course, segments. And the segments go hand in hand with the core archives, I would say, because the Matomo features in the UI and having a lot of analysts working there and putting up their own segments with queries that are gathering a lot of data from the database could potentially take down your application. And of course, the transitions, because it's querying the live and to add indexes to the database. And I don't think I think we still have some problem with the transitions. Heat maps and session recordings, I would say it works very well sometimes, but sometimes it could spam the logs. Or we have one of our clients is using a network monitoring service that will filter traffic that it will detect as spam or denial of service attacks or whatever. So this is something we didn't foresee, and when one of our clients activated heat maps and session recordings. So that was interesting. So a quick recap, because I think my time is running out here. So we use Docker. Matomo has a Docker template. If you go into the official Matomo GitHub webpage, you can search for their Docker. We're of course hosting our own Docker template, but I would say that's a good start if you want to run Matomo in a Docker setup in a cluster environment. And Kubernetes, I have talked about a lot. Any questions, feel free later. Let's see. I have 10 minutes left. Drone to automate stuff. When we push our code into GitHub or GitLab, or GitLab is actually running their own CI service, but drone is something you can integrate with your GitHub repos. And then Claire to check for vulnerabilities in your images, in your Docker images. GitHub, GitLab, I mentioned. There's probably something I have forgotten, but I think you get the big picture. And it was an interesting journey, I would say. And I will leave room for questions, and I will see if I can open up the chat here. Okay, there's a lot of stuff there.
Hey Jorge, I've shared some of the questions here in the chat.
Okay.
You can, yeah.
From Valentin in our chat. Thanks for contributing to open source with this repo. You're welcome. Question: have you ever used Matomo fake visitor plugin in order to have enough data within your Matomo data in order to make some crash tests? Do you make some crash tests with empty Matomo database? The idea would be to educate ourselves about system administration. Yes, I have used the fake visitor plugin, and yes, I wouldn't say that it's the best option to test a big data set, because it takes a very long time to get enough of fake visitors. So some of the penetration tests or the load done, we have actually had taken a big dump of course with from a production, because we want to have as like production as possible. But I would say there's still we haven't figured out the perfect way to do this thing. If I could give any advice, yeah, there's a application, I can't remember the name right now. It's used a lot to load test the varnish, for example. I can if you ping me, I can back to you in LinkedIn or Twitter. I will share my links later. Okay, question from Roberto. With millions of page views, how big is your database? Have you ever met issues regarding the size of your DB and the archive process? So, how big is your database? I would say, I would say it's steady around 800 gigabytes or 1 terabyte, I would say. It goes up and down when we purge some data sometimes after the archivings are done. Some of our clients have different requirements. For example, that they want to do some querying to the database 1 year after. Of course, that database will grow very big, but the class only store for 180 days, so we can start to delete old logs after 180 days, and that's better for the application in whole, I would say. And you can also integrate Matomo to a data lake, a Hadoop cluster, or Kafka or something if you want to do big figures, or superset. It's something we have been looking into. If you want to do more pivoting of the data sets and asking big queries to the database. So yeah, and the archiving process, yeah, we have had a lot of issues. I think we have, if you want to follow our issues we have had through the years, you can go into the Matomo issue queue and you can search for our core archive we have had. But I think we have reached a level of acceptance now. And one of the challenges I think Thomas is going to talk more about, and it's about educating your analysts how to build segments, or what else, forms, you have goals, and all those different plugins or applications or that needs some kind of archiving. Because if you do a too big query on a big data set with a old type of monolithic database system, what is it called? A tabular database like MySQL or MariaDB, you would eventually hit some problems, bottlenecks with performance. You can always optimize the configuration, but I think if you want to do big queries on a database, you will need to integrate with some other system like Superset that I just mentioned. What else? Yeah. Perhaps I missed the number of events at Skatteverket. The figures you showed were page views, right? Yes, that is correct. I don't know from top of my head. I don't know the events, but because they aren't using the tag manager as much as some of our clients that uses a lot of single page applications. We haven't had that many. It doesn't differentiate that much. Of course, there's more events. Of course, I could probably look if you give me a minute. I can jump to the next question. Is MariaDB not supporting Matomo, or is it not recommended for large installations of Matomo? Yeah, so supporting of MariaDB, was it 2 years ago? I would say you can still install with MariaDB, of course, for small sites, but for large installations, if you want to use some configuration, such as there are some MySQL specific configurations that Matomo is using, and I think my time is up there. But of course, you can reach out, and somehow I will share my slides if you want to get in touch with me or ask more questions. I will be more than happy to share them with you. So thank you for your time, and thank you for listening, and thank you for the Matomocamp team. Awesome.